Good morning, everyone. Am I audible? Great. Welcome to Climate Week's India Hub Live, India's big idea, a roadmap for net zero. It brings me immense pleasure to welcome you all here. From the most esteemed leaders, we will hear about government and businesses, what they are doing in India to achieve the net zero target that Indian government has taken, and also their own priorities within the state governments as well as businesses in terms of their responsibility around what they want to do in terms of achievement of net zero and particularly climate action as it refers to India. Our panelists today are those leaders who have not only pledged but are working relentlessly to make India's vision of net zero a reality. India's Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi had released a 5-point agenda towards achieving this target, which is known as Panchamrit in Hindi, which means the 5 nectar elements. These elements will lay out India's clean energy transition pathways and from now on towards our interim targets and then finally to 2070, which is our final target to net zero. Now, Climate Group works with businesses and government, and there is a reason to it. Business and corporates will have a great role to play in upscaling actions, and subnational governments will be where the action will actually take place. They will be the implementers. To capture both the perspectives and lay out before you a picture of how India will achieve its ambitious climate targets, we have designed this session into 2 parts. In the first part, we have a leaders talk on subnational climate action, and in the second part today, a panel discussion on mobilizing business commitment and action on climate. But before that, we have with us Mr. Suman Sinha, who is board member of Climate Group and also chair of India Advisory Group Committee of Climate Group in India. He is the founder, chairman and managing director of Renew Power, and he will deliver the welcome address. Sumant is India's foremost sustainability crusader and wears several other hats, each of which signifies his personal mission and commitment to sustainability and climate action. For his achievements, Sumant has won the S&P Global Platts Trailblazer of the Year 2021 award and SDG Pioneer by the United Nations Global Compact in 2021, besides many other accolades that he has. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Suman Sinha.
Thank you. Yeah, it's working. Thank you, Divya, for the introduction. Good morning to all of you. Today's topic is actually a very interesting and wide-ranging one. The reason being that we all tend to think of climate action in the context of governments and nations and national efforts. But really what we are now finding is that this effort has to really percolate down. It has to percolate much more broadly. And really what I'm seeing over the last couple of years, I would say, is actually very encouraging in that regard. And I would say that the efforts that the Climate Group has been undertaking in India really are meant to make sure that that percolation happens faster. And for example, the Climate Group has the Under 2 coalition, which is essentially meant for states to sign up and become part of the effort to move towards net zero in their own respect. These six states that have signed up actually are a very diverse set of states, all the way from Jammu and Kashmir on the one hand to Maharashtra on the other hand, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh. So quite a diverse set of states that have signed up to this. And I think it reflects a dawning realization within India that states have to play an important role in this whole effort, because the central government really can drive only so much action and can set only so many targets. Ultimately, it's the states, and especially given that India is a federal structure, where the states have to play a very important role. So I think we at the Climate Group, therefore, are playing a very important role in addressing and helping states move in this direction as well. And it's really heartening to see that some of the bigger states and fairly diverse set of states have signed up to this. The second thing that also is very important, obviously, is that the corporate sector, which is among the biggest consumers of electricity on the one hand and one of the biggest sort of group of carbon emitters on the other hand, is also now getting the message much more strongly than it was getting earlier. And again, I see the amount of now conversations that we are having with corporates on moving their own sort of journey forward on decarbonization is actually again very heartening. And as a company, we have been marketing to and trying to get corporates to move forward on their own sort of aspirations to buy clean energy. And we've been doing that for the last almost 2.5 to 3 years. And I would say that it's really in the last year or so, or the last 6 months literally, that we have seen a lot of corporates now really begin to move forward in this direction much more seriously. And to give you a quick sort of sense of numbers, we as a company now have almost 1,500 megawatts worth of PPAs that we've signed in India with corporate customers, which represents almost 10% of our total portfolio in India, which is about 13,000 megawatts. But more interestingly, over the last year and a half, it's represented almost a quarter of all the new PPAs that we've signed. So we're seeing really a diversification of movement away from only the utilities buying power, clean energy from companies like us, to really corporates becoming much bigger buyers of power as well. And from a corporate standpoint, of course, while they want to make a virtue out of it in terms of being able to talk about the fact that they are moving forward on decarbonization, the benefit for them also, of course, is the fact that they're able to get much lower prices rather than what they pay to the grid. So there's actually a win-win here where it really makes a lot more sense for corporates. The second thing that we're now seeing also is that we are also seeing a movement now beyond just corporates buying clean energy. That was, I think, step one on their decarbonization journey. But I think now more and more with the regulatory pressure, with investor pressure, corporates are now beginning to really look at what are their total set of emissions, what are their scope 1 emissions, what are their scope 2 emissions, and also, of course, scope 3. And now they're beginning to get a better handle on that. And now with the disclosure requirements that we have, people have to disclose what exactly their scope 1 to scope 3 emissions are and how to address the whole gamut of those emissions. Clean energy is really something that allows them to address scope 1 and scope 2, but they have to start looking much more broadly. And even clean energy does not obviously allow them to address the whole totality of their emissions. And so therefore, they're now beginning to look at what else they need to do beyond just buying clean energy. And if you look sector by sector, different sectors will have different amounts of emissions being addressed by buying clean energy, but that also leaves a fairly large amount of unaddressed carbon emissions. And so corporates now are thinking about what to do to address the balance of their carbon emissions. And so there, looking at things like carbon credits are becoming really very interesting and important. And while this trend is really just beginning to pick up in India, I see it really much more sort of stronger in companies that are outside of India. And we are therefore now finding that companies outside of India are coming into India with a view to figuring out how they can source carbon credits from India. And so therefore, we are also looking at starting off, in fact, have started off a sort of a business or an initiative to figure out how we can generate carbon credits that can allow us to then service some of these global corporates who are now coming into India and be able to give them these carbon credits. And I'm sure that will also then migrate into the Indian context as well. So we're seeing corporates also reacting in very different and new and innovative ways to figure out how they can source carbon credits in the country as well. On its own part, the Climate Group, of course, has a number of initiatives as well, which at the very least ask of corporates to measure what their consumption is in areas of energy procurement. And we have a program called RE100, and then, of course, looking at energy efficiency and productivity. So there are various programs at the end that the Climate Group has also come out with to try to get corporates to think about these things more seriously and move in that direction. So I think it's really good to see various agencies with the Climate Group sort of at the forefront of that in helping corporates think about some of these things so that they then have to start figuring out how to solve for their own carbon emissions problem. So the good thing, I think, at least from my perspective, is that while the government as a whole for India has set the 2070 net zero target, I am really optimistic, because I see that, as I said earlier, this thing is really beginning to now percolate much more widely and deeply within the whole system of subnational as well as the corporate side. And we have two fantastic panels after this, where I'm sure some of these things will get discussed more, and corporates who are here, Jay Shroff, of course, from UPL, and Sanjay Sethi from Chalet, I think they'll discuss, of course, their own journeys in how they are looking at decarbonization. It'll be really interesting to hear from them on that. And then I know that there's a panel also on discussing how subnationals are going also in the same direction. So I think very interesting that we've got this very eminent group of speakers to talk about this whole movement. I would just add one more thing, that while India has set a target of 2070 to go net zero, I think, and Arunama can of course talk about how that target is arrived at and why 2070 particularly, but to my mind, we had to come out with a net zero number, but we didn't want it to be too sort of tight, and so therefore the compromise solution really was to have the target, but to have it so far away that it was really almost 50 years later. But the point is, my feeling is that given all the work that is happening, given all the developments that are happening, given the technology that is evolving, I would not be surprised if India actually gets there much, much sooner, because as other countries move forward with their own net zero targets, 2050 or 2060, technologies are really moving very rapidly in that, in the direction of finding solutions. To me, clean energy was the first wave. That wave is now solved. I think the technology solutions are there. It's just a question of now implementing them as rapidly as possible. That will help us decarbonize electricity. Electricity itself is becoming a much bigger part of the energy mix, which there is another 3/4 of energy that is not electricity. But electricity will become a bigger part of that mix, and so as that decarbonization happens, we'll see more of that. The second wave that is happening now is green hydrogen. We're still at the beginning part of that wave. That will last the next 5 to 10 years to really take off, but that will allow us to address the other 3/4 of energy in a much more sort of broader sense. And then beyond that, I think the last part of carbon emissions that will need to be addressed will really be direct carbon capture or carbon capture and sequestration type of strategies, which those technologies are still, I would say, at least 10 years away, but eventually we'll need those technologies as well, really just to get to net zero. But once those technologies become mature in the next 10 to 15 years, there is no reason why countries like India will not be able to get to net zero much faster than that. So I'm optimistic, and I hope all of you are as well. And hopefully, as you listen to some of the conversations that happened today, it'll reinforce that sense that India is well and truly on the track to get into net zero by 2070, and perhaps, in fact, should get there even sooner. Of course, none of us is going to be here, at least not some of us will not be here. So we can always, of course, make whatever assertions we want to make, and then whoever is going to be there can test out and see whether we were right or wrong. But thank you very much for listening, and it's going to be an exciting session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Suman, for that thought-provoking and very positive account of what India is up to, particularly the role of businesses and subnational governments in how we can achieve our target even before what we have thought about, and giving us some of the nuances around how we can do this. We always welcome your thoughts and your advice, and Climate Group's endeavor is to work with progressive governments and businesses to help support achieve some of these goals and targets. I would like to now welcome you all to the Leaders Talk, Building Subnational Resilience for India's Net Zero Future. I'm joined by top bureaucracy from two of our Under 2 campaign member states in India, which is Maharashtra and Punjab. We also have with us representation of one of India's foremost policy research institution in the field of climate change. Please join me in welcoming Principal Secretary, Department of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of Maharashtra, Ms. Manisha Patankar-Maiskar. Secretary, Department of Science, Technology and Environment, Government of Punjab, Mr. Kumar Rahul. and CEO, Council on Energy, Environment and Water, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. Welcome. I would like to maybe start with you, Manisha. So Maharashtra has been championing subnational climate action. Your initiative, Mazi Vasundhara, the Youth Climate Initiative, and sectoral mitigation practices have really been a cornerstone, and other states are learning from you. What is Maharashtra's climate North Star? And is the state considering committing to a statewide net zero goal? We would like to also hear from you some of the initiatives that you have taken.
Sure. Could I?
Yes, please. Yes,
Thank
please.
It's easier that way.
Sure.
Very good morning to all of you. As has been mentioned by the two speakers earlier, at COP26, our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji has made a very big announcement, a very definite commitment of India achieving carbon neutrality by 2070. For a country as big as India, it is a very important announcement which was made at COP26. Maharashtra, and I would actually like to acknowledge Climate Group for acknowledging the role that subnationals and states have to play towards making this commitment come true. Maharashtra has begun working towards achieving net zero. In fact, it is working with CEEW about the various possible roadmaps that the state can possibly have. And I think in a short time we would be coming out with a specific date, which Divya just mentioned. To my mind, and some of us were discussing this earlier, 2070 is the date or the year when the last of us amongst India achieves carbon neutrality. And therefore, some states, some companies have to begin doing it much earlier, so that the country as a whole by 2070 achieves neutrality. Maharashtra is committed to the 4 things which our Prime Minister mentions, that of green growth, clean energy, sustainable lifestyle and global well-being. Maharashtra also firmly believes in our Prime Minister's life, which is lifestyle for environment. And it is extremely important that the work that we do at the national and subnational and business level, however important it is, ultimately at the end of the day, all of us together in this room have to adjust or adopt to new lifestyles. We have to adopt to green lifestyles, new lifestyles with the sustainability as the key. And as our Prime Minister is fond of saying, we have to steer away of mindless consumptive lifestyle towards a lifestyle of mindful utilization, which I think is very important. Ultimately, all of us here today at the Climate Group, we need to take this pledge of evolving into a greener lifestyle. Divya mentioned Maji Vasundhara, and Maji Vasundhara is Government of Maharashtra's campaign, which in other words I could say as climate action at grassroots. It involves villages, towns and cities. So from a small village maybe with a population of 1,000 to the mega city of Mumbai, it involves all the villages and towns, that is the local self-governments towards climate action. Maji Vasundhara, which means my earth in Marathi, is based on the 5 elements of nature, which is the air, water, earth, energy and the universe. In order to evolve life and making our next generation aware of the sustainability, Maharashtra has also come up with a Maji Vasundhara curriculum, which is being introduced at the primary and the pre-primary level from this year, which will basically be a sustainable lifestyle action-oriented program. Maharashtra also has a very comprehensive EV policy and a very ambitious goal in the context of India. Like the Prime Minister has announced in the Panchamrut at COP, Maharashtra will achieve 50% of its energy requirements by 2030 through non-renewables. Maharashtra has also done something which is, to my mind, very important. For all of you who understand bureaucracies would understand that the Department of Environment is actually the department which is coordinating the pledge of 2070 neutrality, but individual pillars of climate action have to be done by different departments, be it the Department of Industry, the Department of Energy, the Department of Transport, and so on. So in Maharashtra, the state has established a Maharashtra Council of Climate Change, which is headed by the Chief Minister as its chair and the Deputy Chief Minister as its deputy chair. So that what becomes very important is that the climate action agenda in Maharashtra is not the agenda of only the state Department of Environment and Climate Change, but it becomes the agenda of the entire state of Maharashtra. And because it is the agenda of the state of Maharashtra, I feel very confident that Maharashtra would be amongst the first state to meet our Prime Minister Modi ji's expectations of carbon neutrality. I would end with a little caveat though. All this, of course, the transition will happen, but the transition has to be a just transition. I'm so glad that Climate Group is having another session on just transition. Just transition becomes very, very important for a country like India and a state like Maharashtra. And just transition can also happen when the states and the subnationals are made available of climate finance. And in fact, our Prime Minister has gone on record saying that just as climate action is being tracked, the promise of climate finance also needs to be tracked along with climate appropriate technologies. So with this little caveat, I once again on part of state of Maharashtra say that the state would be amongst the first to achieve our Prime Minister's objective of carbon neutrality at as early a date as possible. Thank you so much, and thank you Climate Group for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry you have.
Thank you, Manisha ji, and in this short span of time, you've given us a good insight about what Maharashtra state government is thinking and working towards. It's really very progressive, and we appreciate the efforts. And I am sure that several other state governments will learn from Maharashtra state. I'll come to Mr. Kumar Rahul from Punjab. So you are the newest under 2 member, so welcome to Climate Group.
Thank you.
We know that agriculture is one of the mainstays of Punjab's economy, but the progressive state that Punjab is, it has already started looking at several other sectoral possibilities and actions towards climate change. There is this launch of ambitious Tandurust Punjab initiative that has very recently been announced, which is a great step to tackle climate change holistically via multi-sectoral initiatives. We would like to hear about some of those initiatives within the larger initiative, and can you let us know how can it become a template for other states and regions?
Yeah. First of all, I will emphasize the importance of Punjab in the economy of India. Punjab having just 2.4% of India's land, it takes care of about 30-40% of India's food security. So keeping Punjab healthy and safe is very important for India. And for the Punjabi population is also very committed to keep Punjab healthy. And looking at all these factors, we have launched one mission, Tandurust Punjab. Tandurust means healthy Punjab, healthy living environment for the people living there. And as you know, there is tendency with the government or large organizations to work in silos. And our living environment, our human life doesn't recognize silos. It requires wholesome approach. And Mission Tandurust basically is a whole of the government approach towards living environment, towards people who are living there. And just to keep that thing in mind, the scheme has been launched, and it has various submissions depending upon the environmental issues of the state, like clean air. Then we are aspiring to have clean water for every population living in the state, management of solid waste, then soil. Soil, basically Punjab is that part of this world, belong to that part of this world where agriculture is being practiced for last thousands of years, and soil nourishment has been depleted. So all those things, how to improve the mineral nutrients in the soil, and how not to further damage the soil conditions, all those things also is there. Apart from that, increasing the green cover in the state, that is very important. We are just on the foothills of Himalayas, and pressure on land due to agriculture, this commitment is very high. So just being on the foothills, our vulnerabilities towards environmental issues, disasters, is slightly on the higher side. So increasing the green cover is very important for us. So we are also working on in that area. Then one of the reason for Punjab being the slightly prosperous in Indian conditions, so we are having high number of road accidents also. So this, under this mission, we are taking care of that road safety, making people aware that how to drive on the road, which lead to minimal number of accidents. Apart from that, children, nutrition of the children. Also under this mission, we have covered how to give the better nourishment to the child so that they become a bit better and fitter individual. And adding to it, we have also introduced fitness and sports facilities, taking care of all fitness and sports facilities in the villages, in the urban areas, for the students, for the adult population also. Apart from that, there is emphasis on preventive health. Preventive health, if one is able to take care of health before getting ill, before getting any disease, that situation is very ideal. So emphasis on that thing also. Apart from that, there is also emphasis on safe food, unadulterated food. What we are eating, that should be safe to your body. So these are some of the submissions which we are working under this Mission Tandurust Punjab, and there is an annual action plan, and there is a monitoring mechanism which is monitored by the highest executive body of the state. And idea is to make people climate resilient also, and make living environment in such a condition that it leads to minimal damage, and net zero targets are met before what we have set the target. It's like that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It's quite a holistic approach, I would say, because we are not only talking about mitigation, climate action, but we are also looking at the vulnerability of people and the land. And I think it's very important, particularly in the context of India, because geopolitically our situation is also around vulnerability, and adaptation becomes as important as mitigation for a country like India. So thank you very much for your interventions. I'm taking on from the question that Manisha ma'am had left and bringing it to you, Arunabha. You have been part of the work that was done on India to Net Zero High Level Policy Committee, and it explores how India can achieve net zero emissions in a manner that it is just and equitable. You've also been working for quite a time now around looking at some of the nuances around climate finance, particularly for India's climate action. We would like to know about that. Also in the context that India will be presiding about G20 next year, how do you see we would be faring in the next 1 year and later after all towards some of these goals?
Thank you, Divya, and thank you to the Climate Group for having me. And of course, it's wonderful to hear straight from the state governments, because the action is literally happening on the ground. Just as a way of introduction, I run the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, which is an independent think tank. but I also have a role here. The UN Secretary General appointed me to the high-level expert group on the net zero commitments of non-state actors, basically states, cities, and companies, what we are discussing today. And I am really encouraged, not just by what Prime Minister Modi said on 1st of November last year, but what has been happening since. And so much of what you've already heard is just a sample of what is happening at the state level, at the city level in India in terms of thinking. But before I answer your question, Divya, let's just go back in history a little bit. 2010, when our national solar mission began, we had less than 20 megawatts of solar in the country. Thanks to the hard work of people like Sumant in this room, we now have more than 60,000 megawatts of solar, more than 165,000 megawatts of non-fossil electricity capacity, which accounts for more than 40% of our entire electricity capacity. And in our upgraded NDC that India just brought out last month, we are aiming for 50% of that electricity capacity to be non-fossil. Now, of course, capacity and generation are different. So if you include large hydro, already about 27% of India's electricity generation is coming from non-fossil sources at the peak. Of course, some days it's lower. Now, if you jump 50 years ahead, right, my 10-year-old daughter is going to be approaching retirement in 2070. So Sumant is absolutely right. Some of us won't be around, but she will be. So it's her journey, and that's the transformation journey that India's getting onto. Now, during that journey, we have to go from about 60 gigawatts of solar now to 5,600 gigawatts of solar. I mean, that's an exponential rise that no country has gone through this kind of pace of energy and economic transformation. Hence, what needs to happen? I see 3 different ways in which the story can be catalyzed. The first is what you've already heard about this subnational action. Because unless we bring the energy transition closer to people, it's very hard to make a political case. I call it the political sustainability for sustainability. So when people are able to see that there's not just the push for sustainability, but also push for jobs and growth, which is happening within their states, within their cities. India already has more than 111,000 people working in large-scale renewables, including distributed renewables, that's over 300,000 people. Now, of course, that's smaller than the million and a half people working in coal mining, but it's a rapidly growing workforce. By 2030, this workforce will be 1 million people. In sustainable cooling, we'll have 2 million people by the end of the 2030s. In the green hydrogen sector, we'll have 1.9 million people in the workforce. Right? So the job story is going to be central towards not just transition, but it's going to be central towards building that political sustainability for sustainability. The second thing that needs to happen, of course, is the growth and investment story. So again, as Sumant rightly said in his opening remarks, it's not just 2070. What's going to happen in this decade? India is offering a $200 billion investment opportunity in renewables capacity deployment alone, $206 billion market for electric mobility, over $100 billion to about $150 billion market for green hydrogen, all by 2030. Add it all up, it's an investment opportunity of over $500 billion. How much is in the Inflation Reduction Act for climate action? About $350 billion. So, all we've not done, which the United States has done, is packaged it in one big legislation which says, oh, wow, that's $350 billion invested in climate action. But India is investing or looking for investments for over $500 billion in this decade. Therefore, the third thing, and I'll close, what needs to happen, not 50 years, not 10 years, what needs to happen within the next 12 months? Because September next year, India will host the G20 presidency. And I'm part of an advisory group for the finance minister on the finance track and also on the Sherpa track. I think this is a critical opportunity for India to showcase not just its climate action and its climate ambition, but create the platforms that drive 2 types of catalysts. One is large-scale investment in technologies that are already available but are not getting deployed at scale and at the pace that's needed, not just in India, but in other emerging markets. In a few weeks from now, CW is releasing its next report on Vietnam's energy transition. We've done work in Indonesia, South Africa. So how do we funnel in money through India and to emerging markets for large-scale renewables investments? And the second is, for the technologies that are not yet mature, how do we catalyze a rules-based order for bridging the technology, the manufacturing, the deployment, and the supply chains, and the end-use offtake for things like green hydrogen? I think if we can get the wheels moving really fast in these two areas, then it really begins to translate those leader-level announcements into something that is much more tangible, much more real, much more on ground, and much more driven by that trinity of jobs, growth, and sustainability.
Thank you, Anurabha. I don't think I can summarize that. I won't be doing any justice to, but I'm really pleased that you brought some of these points together, talking about how India is thinking about energy and economic transformation, while it is also thinking about how it can be just and equitable. And I really like your idea around bringing energy transition closer to people, which is pivotal to Indian government strategy to achieving net zero target. So that brings us to the end of this very, very useful session. Thank you very much for these extremely important and useful interventions, and also introducing some of these initiatives with us to this audience. And without wasting any time, I would like to really thank all the three panelists today. And I would like to invite my colleague Atul Mudliar, who is Head of Business Actions, Climate Group India, to lead the next segment of the session. Can you see where Atul is?
Just for, yeah, great. Just going to say thanks, Divya, for hosting an excellent discussion today, and thanks for all the panelists from the state, and certainly Arunabha for those insightful discussions as well as remarks that he's made. So we move to the next part of the session today, which is, while we have looked at states and what states are doing in India, I think it's a bit about us to also kind of reflect on what the role that businesses can play as well in terms of mobilizing commitment as well as action. So with that, and having heard the political view of what can be done on climate action, I think it's a good segue for us to look at what businesses will be doing. With that, the next segment, let me invite on stage Jay Shroff, Global CEO, UPL, Nagma Mullah, CEO of Edelgift Foundation, and Sanjay Sethi, MD and CEO of Chalet Hotels. Come. Welcome again, Sanjay, Nagma, and Jay. Nice to see you, and thanks for being a part of this panel. Sanjay, why don't we just kick off and begin with you? I think it's just the right time for us to be speaking with you as well. Almost a year back, we were celebrating Chalet Hotels to be the first company globally from the hospitality sector to have taken 3 commitments in one go: RE100, EP100, as well as EV100. It's been a year. It's a good time for us to kind of just reflect back on that. As a business, you are playing multiple roles. You are a developer, you are an owner, you are an operator, as well as a manager of high-end hotels, as well as real estate, which is spread across the country in India. You're also operating in several cities, which means you are navigating through extremely complex and different policies and regulations. What is your climate strategy, and what are you prioritizing now over what you're keeping for later?
Atul, thank you. It's a pleasure being here at the Climate Week. And Yeah, it's been an interesting journey over the last 1 year. I think I'm here to speak about the role of the hospitality industry on the climate action, and more particularly about chalet hotels. And your question about working in many states, you're right. It's true of every federal democracy that there will be some challenges. Policies may not be consistent in every state, and you've got to navigate them. For example, just as an anecdotal example, we are large consumers of electricity, and we like to get to renewable as soon as possible. Now, we've had, out of the 3 states that we operate in 2 states, we're almost at 80 to 90% of our electricity comes through renewable sources. On the 3rd state, we couldn't make any progress because their legislation didn't allow us to do that. There's some recent changes which now give us an option of getting there. But that's an example, right? In Maharashtra, for example, ma'am's here, we get 80 to 90% of our energy through renewable sources. And that's a big positive for us. Another anecdotal example, and that's more a national example, is that very often, cross-border trade agreements and, the import duties, et cetera, play a role in creating some barriers for working towards these climate actions. For example, as a hotel business, we do maintain a large fleet of vehicles for guest use, and we'd like to move to EVs as soon as possible, and that's a commitment that 2025 will be 100% EVs. I'm hoping to actually clear that by end of next year. But today, for our 5-star luxury hotels, I need EVs with rear seat comfort. Unfortunately, all the EVs in India right now come with only driver comfort. Mercedes has come out with something which is very expensive. We just can't afford it. Right? So we're waiting for newer EVs to come out. And I think the import duty part has to be looked into by the government to enable us to move quicker in that direction. But these are anecdotal examples. To answer the second part of your question, as a company, we are very ESG driven. And I think that's more of a group philosophy of K. Raja Corp, the parent. Chalet is a listed entity, but the promoters are K. Raja Corp. And all their group companies are very, very ESG focused. I think what's important for us is the Chalet has put its neck out a little more than other companies by committing to all the 3 goals. I think that's driven by the confidence that I have on the team, which is a very enabled and engaged team and motivated team to deliver these things. They've always tended to exceed stretch goals. We're very confident that we'll meet all our commitments on the EV 100, RE 100, and EP 100 soon. Our climate strategy actually encompasses 8 focus areas, 24 key performance indicators, 51 targets that we're working on right now. And as mentioned by you earlier, we're committed to the 3 goals. We are also right now committed to 42% reduction in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 2030. We're hoping to improve that number in the near future, but that's where we are today. In addition, we have ongoing initiatives to minimize single-use plastic, water management, dry, wet, and electronic waste management, with definite plans and goals for each of them. Let me share a few numbers. I think that will be interesting for the audience here. We have brought down electricity consumption by 19% from a base year of 2019 on a per room basis, because that's the way to measure it. We brought down water consumption by 13%. We've increased energy productivity on a base year of 2016 by 73%. So clear progress happening on those fronts. We have 0 waste water discharge in our hotels. Even the cooking oil that we use goes out to authorized dealers who convert it into biofuel. So just to summarize, we're working on it. We aren't there, but we're very motivated to get there very quickly.
Thanks, Sanjay. Jai, I switch to you. UPL is playing a very key role across more than 135 markets and providing solutions which are sustainable, specifically for the agricultural sector. And this kind of spans from something as basic and germinal as providing high-quality seeds, all through to engaging with farmers and providing them solutions on carbon credits. Could you tell us a bit about how UPL, as an organization in the agricultural sector, is integrating sustainability into its broader strategy?
Thanks. No, at UPL, UPL is a global leader in crop protection, seeds, and has a presence over 135 countries working. Almost every farmer in the world uses at least one of our products. That journey has brought a lot of realizations. And we have come to a conclusion that to really fight the climate change crisis, we have to include agriculture. And the journey started more than 10 years ago, where we really felt that unless the farmers, business economics, if a farmer can be profitable, this whole journey is going to falter. And so we've taken a commitment to make every food value chain more sustainable. What do we mean by that? It means that we will work with farmers and bring sustainable technology which improve farmer resilience. And if you improve farmer resilience, he will adopt more technology, because coming from India, working in Africa and around the world, we see that farmers are highly subject to every kind of impact. He will definitely have a flood, he will definitely have a drought, he'll definitely have a pest problem, he will definitely have no buyers for his product, all in a 5-year period, sometimes more than one in a year. So how do you make him more resilient? And we believe that there has to be a reward and recognition system for farmers following sustainable practices. Now, going on a macro level, 30% or 25 to 30% of the global emissions come from agriculture. A 10% improvement in sustainable practices in agriculture can actually meet all the goals required, and we don't need to fly here for this meeting. But we need a reward system for farmers, like we do with electric vehicles, like we do for gold standard buildings, all those type of things. It's a complicated process, but a business like us can execute because we work with farmers at the grassroots level through his life cycle, through his crop life cycle. And so we have lots of projects. We have some really exciting projects we are piloting. Last year we stopped crop burning on 400,000 acres in Punjab and Haryana, and actually reduced the dust and particulate pollution plus about 5 tons an acre of carbon emission. That's 2 million tons. This year, the pilot project with the rice methane emission and the 750,000 acres of crop burning target which we have taken, we should generate almost 1 million tons of carbon sequestration. So these are very large projects, and in terms of some of the challenges. But most importantly, we have launched something very exciting across all the countries UPL operates, as called the Gigaton challenge. That is 1 billion tons by 2040 sequestered through agriculture. And I truly believe that with the technologies we already have and which are in the pipeline, we should be able to meet that target much before. And that's a huge achievement. But wherever we are seeing some of these pilots which we are executing in terms of reduction of water, reduction of fertilizer, reduction of improving soil carbon, the emission reduction, agriculture is the only natural process for actually removing, sequestering carbon from the air. All other processes are reducing the amount they use. But with agriculture, we can actually, if we can store it better, that is removing the CO2 from the air. So it's actually a much better a system. And I believe that rewarding farmers for sustainable behavior will drive this whole transformation much faster. The problem I see is that it's much easier for governments to reward electric vehicles because it's very tangible. You can see it in the cities. How do you measure and monitor some farmer in Punjab, as Secretary was saying, or in Maharashtra, and how do you sort of measure the system? It's not easy. But with technology today, we can actually geofence the farms. We can track everything we're doing. and do soil analysis and actually see how much carbon is being retained in the soil. So we believe that this, and with our Gigaton challenge, where we are involving and signing up all global governments to commit to rewarding farmers for sustainable behavior. And I don't mean they have to pay them money, but the food system should give them priority. They get, they sell their products faster. We're talking about labeling now, sustainably grown crops. And these sort of things, I believe that the Gigaton challenge should be able to be reached much, much faster. And I think agriculture will be a key source of decarbonizing the world, because you're not reducing it, but you're removing carbon from the atmosphere. And I believe that with the awareness which UPL is taking, with all the initiatives, including making the World Cup and partnering with FIFA Foundation and doing all those things, we think we will be able to mobilize all the actors in the space, including the food companies, to be able to do that. Thank you.
Lovely.
Great, thanks, Jai. I think it's interesting that companies like yours are in fact putting the weight behind products and solutions and initiatives which are propagating intrinsic sustainability. And I think that's a good way. While we look for external opportunities of reducing carbon, and I think all of us as companies, as states are doing that, this is a good way of looking inwards for solutions and investing in solutions which can then further propagate a virtuous cycle.
Just to say, most UPL is top rated on all the indexes which measure us in our industry on ESG standards, but they measure us for our factory. And I always tell them, I said, we deal with hundreds, millions of farmers around. Please don't consider a factory as a barometer, because the impact of our association or interaction with millions of farmers in Africa, India, Brazil, US is such a large, more impactful what we can do. So that's a challenge which I think all the indexes which track the ESG will start understanding how to measure that.
Great, thanks. Nagma, I'll come to you. You are promoting effective philanthropy. Tell us a bit about your organization, Edelgive Foundation, and tell us what kind of gap are you trying to fill, how are you doing that, and how would you take the industry along?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me for this very, very exciting and much needed conversation. To give you a context, I represent Edelgive Foundation. We are 15 years old, and for 15 years we've been focused on gender, climate, and education. 10 years ago, we made a strategic decision to move out of urban skilling into rural livelihoods, and a whole new world of India, populations, communities, and how they live their daily lives opened up for us. It was one of the best decisions we made about a decade ago. When we moved in there, we understood how people live their daily lives and cope, and how land, water, natural resources have a huge role to play in everything from socioeconomic norms to climate adaptation or mitigation of any kinds. At that time, this vocabulary was not, we were not even aware of it. We were simply enabling communities to live their life with more dignity. Alongside that, what we do really well is bridge the gap of resources between those who would like to give and those who need to receive. And so building large structures to ensure many can give to many is what our expertise is on. And last year we launched the largest and the first collaborative in the world, which has a portfolio of 100 NGOs in India, which is more modeled on a mutual fund where multiple funders and some brilliant funders have come together to fund organization building of these 100. So when I speak today, I speak from building structures to ensure resources get mapped, and also understanding it from the lens of need instead of the lens of solution. Because I think for all of this conversation to make sense, the right question has to be asked. Sometimes the question is flawed, or the question is addressing a problem that we're not really needing to solve on priority. With that, 5 years ago, we came across India Climate Collaborative. We resisted joining it because we said, we're just livelihoods people, we don't understand climate. And couldn't be more wrong. So it's a journey of 5 years into understanding this remarkable, very urgent discourse on what people really need. And here are my learnings. One is that most of the main stakeholder of this whole discourse is the human being, the communities. And most of these human beings and most of these communities are not aware that they are victims of climate injustice or in any shape or form combating climate crisis. For them, it's an everyday, it's an every year. A drought is God's wrath, a flood is what they deserve. And for them to even be involved in this conversation is something that I think we've missed. And for the last 5 years, this is what we do. The secondly is what we realized is there's this incredible amount of knowledge, thinking, experts, think tanks that have come together to define and articulate what the problem is, and there's incredible amount of funding that's available. But that's really intent and action and laying out frameworks. There's a huge gap between what people intend to do and the action on it. So our big journey has been how to identify solutions that are already existing. People, see, we're discussing this. The urgency has come out in the last many years. But human beings and people have been combating climate crisis for years. And they have adapted. And so climate adaptation is happening while we are talking about it. So our whole mission is how to identify those players who are working with communities real time, solutions that are already available, and to visibilize it to the international community and say, hey, this is what you thought, and this is what's already going on. The second mission is how do we take all this knowledge that is available in the global arena and plug it into the local networks and say, this is the intent here, these funds are available, this technical expertise is available, and this is what you're going to do. So our next mission is how do we create a fund like GROW, which is our fund for 100 NGOs for climate, and get all the actors involved in the table, all the stakeholders, like these marvelous businesses who are putting this intent on the table, governments who are getting very proactive, international conversations that have leaps and bounds headway made ahead of us, and with the action on the ground, with that farmer, that woman who is dealing with it every single day while we think about it. So I'll pause here. Thank you.
Thanks, Nagma. Thanks so much.
Wonderful.
Sanjay, from your vantage of seeing the industry closely, and this is something that's also come up yesterday at the opening ceremony as well, how do you unlock growth and climate action, and both of them side by side? Also knowing that now the pandemic is behind us, hopefully. India has just pipped UK to become the 5th largest economy just a few weeks back, just behind US, China, Japan, and Germany. So clearly there's a lot of hope from the Indian industry. But growth needs to happen to support and underpin, livelihoods and jobs. And we need to work on climate action as well. How do you do that?
So look, I believe climate action aligns very well with being business savvy. Let me put it like this. I think the first thing that we need to worry about, and the big challenge today, is not the smaller ones that I spoke about on regulations, et cetera. We'll sort those out. I think the big challenge is the urgency of the climate action, right? We're running out of time. I think from that perspective, we're living in a climate emergency now. We need concrete climate action today. We need it to be meaningful. We need it to be comprehensive. We need it to be collective. And we need it to be amplified. And from that perspective, I think one of the things that we need to focus on is how can we align climate action with business needs? And on that front, I'm looking at our business, for example, in this fashion. The millennials and the Gen Zs are rapidly becoming a primary target audience, right? Millennials are already there, actually. And if you look at millennials, they would have a strong preference of products and services which are climate friendly. For millennials, it's non-negotiable, right? As they come in to be the primary target audience, it'll be non-negotiable for an organization not to be climate friendly. So it makes a lot of business sense from that perspective, also to capture that new target audience that you're looking at. So revenue upside possible through good climate action. I'm trying to align the urgency of climate action with the business needs. On the other hand, I think there is a very strong correlation in working on climate action and cost management. And we've seen that happen over the years. At Chalet, for example, we would constantly reinvest capex into the largest energy consumers like chiller plants. And they consume almost 40% of my electricity that we use in the hotels. And with a payback period of 2-3 years, you actually come out the better in the short term or medium term. So we do those sort of things. So it's revenue friendly to be climate positive. It is cost friendly to be climate positive. It's a no-brainer that we need to get there. And more importantly, I think it's the whole survival of the planet and therefore business continuity. So that's my strong view on this. Cliched but strong climate action will work for all stakeholders, including shareholders.
Thanks, Sanjay. Jay, to you. At UPL, how big a role sustainability is going to play to make India's agricultural economy resilient to climate change? And this in the context, for the audience, just to recall that the 1/5 of the Indian GDP is in fact underpinned by agriculture as the major sector. And around 55% and slightly more than that, which is around 600 million people, have their livelihoods associated with agriculture and allied activities. How at UPL do you see sustainability kind of making that resilience?
No, so the Indian agriculture faces a lot of challenges. Some of the biggest one is the fact that there are millions of smallholder farmers. Labor costs are going up dramatically. I believe that labor costs will double, and there is no mechanization, so food prices are going to be going up steadily, but not much, because inflation is a big food inflation is a huge political issue in a country like India. So farmers are in a trap. Their costs are going up, and they can't increase food prices because India is a poor country, and that will cause huge political disruption if the food prices go up. Other side is the government spending huge amounts of money on fertilizer subsidies and different kind of interventions in agriculture. The third thing is water, which is 97% of fresh water is used in agriculture. That is scarce. So all these challenges being faced by agriculture, and if you look at it, it can head to a big disaster. So at UPL, we are doing a lot of investment, pilots, scaling of different technologies and systems to really intervene and tackle these things. So we are a farmer in Brazil owns machines. One machine worth $500,000. A 5-acre farmer cannot even have a $15,000 machine. So how do you Uberize this whole concept of mechanization, because he cannot pay 700 rupees a day, which is going to be the cost in the next few years per day for labor, which he uses today. 10 years ago, it was 50 rupees. 20 years ago, it was 10 to 15 rupees a day labor. Today, it's 300 rupees. And so it's going to squeeze them, and they're going to, they just don't know what to do. Water resources, always there's going to be a battle between population, cities, and agriculture water, but what can you do? And so bringing in technologies to reduce water. Our project with sugarcane industry in Maharashtra, we're talking about, we claim 30%, but we're talking about 70% reduction in water, which can be a huge, huge boost for this conflict. And then using on the fertilizer side, on soil health side, we're bringing in a lot of technology to reduce the use of conventional fertilizer with biofertilizers, with different microbial activities in soil, which can actually improve productivity of agriculture with reduction in fertilizer. And we are committed to about 30% reduction in fertilizer, which would save the government itself in subsidies I think maybe $10 billion a year. So lots of actions happening there, really to make sure that the farmers remain financially viable, and it can be a big crisis. If we don't deal with these in the next 10 years, I think energy imports will not be our problem. Food imports can be a problem because, if you have a 5-acre farmer and his son has to go work on a farm, but actually if he's a food delivery guy, he makes more money than farming 5 acres. Why should he farm? And that can cause a big disruption because land values are distorted and it's not consolidating.
Thanks. Agma, final question to you. While Sanjay and Jai push their way through, the transition that they want to see, how would you want them to be making sure that this transition is just, fair, and equitable?
Yeah. Thank you for this very important question. And while I think both of you are doing amazing work, and this kind of sensitivity towards the final stakeholder is very important when we plan, I think overall what businesses need to take care of when we're looking at net zero commitments or working towards a more climate friendly model. First is that when we're looking at these large targets, I think breaking them down into more doable, achievable, reachable, bite-size milestones becomes very, very important, because otherwise this is a larger than life transition that we're talking about. Also the risk management of it all. And what are the risks of this transition? Because like you said, you get it wrong, there are communities that suffers, there's businesses that suffers. But most importantly, I think what businesses can do is what they're really, really good at, which is change management. This is change management. We're trying to change years of habits, processes, revenue pipelines that have been working for us. So when we are looking to change, you have to know what to change and what not to as well. Like some processes should not be transitioned out of because they're too costly, they'll disrupt too much. Identifying that, placing it there, and viewing this as a change management process that keeps the final stakeholder at the center of it all. I think that becomes very important. Second is, in this, we're not like sectors dealing with this alone. This problem is too big. This is like a collaboration of the governments, businesses, civil society. And in this discourse of businesses transitioning into better processes, asking for help from the development sector, or taking because we are connected to the communities. We are a direct, like today we fund 200 NGOs from across the country. The knowledge that comes in from these communities, the feedbacks, and the suffering that they face whenever all transition is painful. But how can we make it least painful, least costly for the final consumer, for the final stakeholder, becomes very important. So I think sticking to what we know best and doing it together is our best bet to deal with this. And being humble about what we can do and what we cannot is extremely important when we're going after goals that are going to live beyond our lifetime. So I think that's just about it.
Thanks, great. I think that's a good way to end on that note. I think the big thing for me really is, Nagma, from what you said about just transition, is the industry and all the stakeholders ready to reconcile with an upheaval which needs to be accommodated, needs to be absorbed, and at what pace can we do that is really the essence of it.
Absolutely.
So thanks, I think, for the fascinating conversation, Jai. Sanjay, you...
Can I just give one final input? I think it's very important for corporates to understand that whilst Honorable Prime Minister has given 2070 as the goal for net zero, corporates need to be about 2 decades ahead of that. I do believe that the 2070 will get revised downward at some point of time. But we need to stay 20 years ahead of that. That's one. Second, I think we need to start conversation in households in India to mobilize the grassroots levels to talk about climate, and therefore support governments and corporates to take us to the next level.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's our job.
Thanks so much for that fascinating conversation. Divya, to you.
Thank you all the panelists and Atul for this great session. We come to the close of the session. Each of our panelists have added to the depth of topics we have covered this morning. Ambitious national and subnational actions will create accelerated transition and long-term impacts, while creating resilient systems and adaptive capacity of population in India. And businesses are geared up, as we have just heard. Thank you all for being present here with us and all the panelists again. I hope those who are seeing it and watching it online found it useful and engaging, and we hope you will remain with us here for several other events that we have between today and tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a great day.